Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm taking a look at the Eachine EV300D FPV goggles. Now, these are a pre-production model, so it's hard for me to give them a full review, although I have fed back some of the issues that I found, and they say that they are fixing almost all of them for the production version. So, if they stick to their word on that, then these could be a serious contender. But before I go any further, here is my usual FPV goggle disclaimer. FPV goggles are really difficult to review because we all have different shaped faces, different sized noses, and our eyes can be short or long-sighted and spaced apart differently. So I can only give my experience on those aspects of this goggle, which may be completely different to your experience of this goggle. So I always encourage people to try and find a local FPV group like I did using Facebook, or go and travel to a drone event where there will be an abundance of people willing to let you try out their goggles. However, with these being a pre-production unit, that last part of the disclaimer is only possible when people start buying them. Anyways, they have sent me the black version, but they also come in a white material. I'd say my preference would be the white version because the black material tends to heat up in the sun. That hasn't been a problem in my country this year. So let's get on to the big stuff first. The IPD adjustment is from 56 to 72 millimeters. I have them maxed out to the size to get a clear image, but that's because my eyes are really far apart. I was lucky enough to visit Painless 360 recently to try out the HDO2s, and there was a lot more wiggle room to get a clearer image, whereas with the EV300Ds there is more of a sweet spot. Of course, the EV300Ds are much cheaper than the HDO2s, but in terms of features and picture quality, they come really close to the Fat Sharks. In fact, discounting the DJI HD goggles, if I were to rank all of the compact goggles that I've tried so far when it comes to picture quality, the HDO2s would be first and the EV300Ds would be second. You can see that similar to the HDOs, the focal length can be adjusted from -8 to +3. They have even put markers on the dials to give you a rough idea of where to start. They've gone one further because a complaint of the HDO2s is that this new built-in focal adjustment is no good for people with astigmatism. So they have included slots for custom diopters if you need them. However, they aren't the standard Fat Shark sized diopters. Instead, you are given these round plastic inserts, and the manual states that the diopters are not included in the package. So you are either going to have to send off the inserts to one of the custom diopter vendors and they make up some custom ones for you, or you have to fashion your own, which isn't ideal, but at least they have given you an option. Despite the eyepiece being round like the new HDO2s, this has got to be a coincidence when you consider the diopter adapters and the screens are not OLED. They are still using an Alcos system, but boy, have they improved it. Now, I didn't get to spend a lot of time with the HDO2s, but when I switched between both of them, I found that it was really difficult to pick the quality of the image apart. If you have watched my past videos on Alcos goggles, such as the Top Skies and the EV200Ds, then you will know that a trait of Alcos is a little bit of ghosting due to all of the mirrors and polarization involved in the technology. They have come so far with that now, you can only really see any ghosting effects if you are looking hard for it. And when you're flying, you won't notice it at all. You will, however, be blown away by the brightness and the quality of the image. This time the panels are natively 4:3 with a resolution of 1280 by 960. They can be switched to 16:9 through the menu system. ALCOS is a pretty delicate technology, so I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments how your EV200Ds or top skies have lasted, because mine are still fine, but they aren't my daily driver. They have kept the dual diversity system and are sadly still using RPSMA connectors, so it was a struggle to find enough antennas for them because I didn't receive any antennas in the package, and I believe that will be the case with the production version. So I've got two IonWay Omni antennas on the top and the Menace, Invader and Pico Patch antennas on the bottom. This diversity system didn't make much of a difference in terms of RF performance with the EV200Ds, and it actually makes the goggles pretty heavy, and the module bay covers keep falling off because just like the EV200Ds, the modules aren't held down properly, as you can see if I waggle the antennas. But I'm told this has been fixed for the production version, and if it's not, then some double-sided foam tape sorted that issue out with the EV200Ds. Luckily, both modules are removable, and I've tried the rapid fire module out with these goggles and it works, which makes the goggles much lighter. You have to put the aftermarket modules on the left hand side, and you can only run one due to the way that the stock modules interact with each other. Every time the goggle boots up using the rapid fire module, for some reason the channel switches to race band 4 every time, and there's no way of controlling it from the goggles, and that's the case with all aftermarket modules. You can still use the button on the rapid fire module to change the settings, and the on-screen display does feed through to the screens, so it's not such a big deal. Now, this pre-production version has come with some extended covers to use with third-party modules. Unfortunately, they won't fit over the rapid fire module. They really should have just copied the ergonomics of the Fat Shark module bay, seeing as they are the standard for all aftermarket modules. Eachine do tell me that the production covers will fit the rapid fire system. I'd always take what Eachine say with a pinch of salt because they have previous instances of not sticking to their word. On the upside, I'm sure someone will come up with some 3D printed covers for various modules because most of them are going to be supported by the goggle. Next, I want to talk about the fitment. They provide this foam inlay that has two removable Velcro wedges for people like me with a rounder face. I think all goggle manufacturers should have been doing this from the beginning because they fit the shape of my face perfect and I get zero light leak. The strap is really nice with the battery intended to be mounted at the back. This pre-production unit didn't come with a battery, but the final product will come with an 18650 battery case. There's also an extra strap to go over the top of your head if you need some extra support. However, I didn't place the battery at the back of the goggles because they are already pretty heavy at 376 grams. So I used the tethered cable that came with the DJI goggles and used a 4S LiPo because the weight of the modules and the antennas and battery was putting a fair amount of pressure on my nose. Unfortunately, the nose cutout is smaller than the EV200Ds. Now again, Eachine say that they are going to make this bigger for the production version. With the battery in my pocket, the goggles are pretty comfortable on my face now, and when I'm using the rapid fire module, I don't get any pressure on my nose at all because it's much lighter. Now, my nose is pretty big, so they might be fine for you. This is why I give out the disclaimer at the start of the video. The goggles will take a high voltage range from 7.4 volts all the way up to 28 volts. And I'd really recommend using a bigger battery tethered to your pocket, because I tried a Fat Shark battery just for testing, and first of all the battery sagged to half of its power level instantly due to the extra current draw of the two fans and the Alcos system, and after 20 minutes the goggles' low battery warning started going off. The micro SD card slot for the DVR is in the center of the goggles, which I know people don't like. As a Fat Shark user, this is something that I'm used to and don't see it as a problem. It takes up to a Class 10 64GB card and records in a resolution of 720 by 576 with a bitrate of 2.4 megabit at 25 frames per second with AVI as the container. The bitrate can be lower than other DVRs because it's using the H.264 codec, which has better compression handling than most DVRs, which are actually using the MJPEG codec. There are some downsides to using the H.264 codec, which I'll get onto later. So, taking a look around the rest of the goggles, there is a power button which you have to press for a fair few seconds, and I like that because it also doubles up as the defog and fan button with a short press. Then, using the goggles with the stock modules, a short press of the channel button will take you through the 8 channels of each band, and a long press will change the band. The modules support up to 72 channels in total. By the way, you will see a lot more ghosting appearing in these images, which you wouldn't see if you were looking through the goggles with your own eyes, and that's because the screens are so bright that I had to reduce the ISO of my camera to the lowest that it would go, which puts the goggles image at a similar brightness to the ghosted image. Otherwise, it would just be too bright to capture anything to show you guys. The same goes for any flickering that you can see, which is the camera's shutter speed syncing up with the Alcos backlight, which sends red, green and blue light in sequence. Unfortunately, the on-screen display can't be turned off, and Eachine have told me that they can't change that, which is a shame. The on-screen display actually tells you some useful information, such as the RSSI levels of each antenna, although that doesn't work when using an aftermarket module. It also shows you the battery level, although I wish it showed you the voltage level rather than an icon. If you press the fan button, then a fan icon appears, and to turn the DVR on, it's a long press of the DVR button, which will give you a green icon to say that the goggles are ready to record. Then it's a short press of the DVR button to start the recording, and the icon should turn red. Sadly, the goggles don't have a supercap, so if you unplug your battery or power off the goggles using the power button and you have forgotten to stop the DVR recording, then a file won't even be saved to the card at all. You'll also have to completely format the micro SD card before it will produce any files at all. So that's a downside for me because I'm always swapping SD cards around, but you'll have to have a dedicated micro SD card for the DVR in these goggles. To play back the recorded footage, you have to make sure you are in DVR mode but not recording, and it's a long press to the right to enter the menu, and I don't think a lot has changed here. You press the DVR button forward, backwards, left or right to get to the video that you want to watch, and then press down on the button to start playing the video. Then it's right to fast forward up to 8 times the speed, and then the center button again to get it playing at normal speed. Pressing down again will pause the video or play it again, and pressing to the left will reverse the speed up to 8 times. It's a little bit slow and clunky, but it does work. One thing I couldn't get to work was the delete and protect function. You get to that by long pressing the button to the left from the main DVR menu, and you are given the option to delete or protect the file that is currently selected. I think the idea of the protect function is to stop you deleting files that you might want accidentally. There's an option to unprotect them as well, but none of that matters because I tried to delete a bunch of files and they still all showed in the DVR menu and were still on the micro SD card when I put it into the computer. But that's not so much of a big deal as the files are pretty small and I'm yet to fill a micro SD card with DVR footage, and I always record DVR every time I fly. So for me, the most important feature is the ability to play back, pause, fast forward and rewind, which is all working. Then to exit the DVR menu, it's a long press to the right. So then we have the mode button, and a short press forwards and backwards adjusts the volume of the headphone jack, but left and right doesn't do anything, and I can't help feel that they could have used this to get rid of the on-screen display. But anyways, a long press down of the mode button starts a band scan, which is very slow and you can't stop it once it's going. So for me, it would have made much more sense to have this as the main menu button, because I keep finding myself accidentally doing this band scan and I just have to turn the goggles off because there's no getting out of it until it's finished. To get into the main menu, it's a long press to the left, and there are so many options to the point where it's getting into Sky Zone territory. The last thing that you want to be doing in the field is trying to remember which button to press, and the menu disappears far too quickly as well. Ironically, it's one of the only options that you can't change other than turning the on-screen display off. Anyways, the first option is picture mode, which was set to user out of the box, and this allows you to either use different color presets or choose your own. The user setting looks the best to me, so I've kept it as that. The next one is color temperature, and again it was set to medium out of the box, and I think it looks the most natural like this. There are other color presets as well as a custom user preset. Then we have the aspect ratio, which has some pretty weird settings, but importantly it's got the two useful ones that I'm after. It was set to 4:3 out of the box, which cuts some of the right hand side of the screen off. If I navigate down to panorama, that fixes it and retains the 4:3 aspect ratio, which is fine. But then there are these weird zoom options, which would only be useful if they reduce the field of view when people are struggling to get a clear image, but instead it zooms in on the camera, cutting off your on-screen display and reducing the field of view, and I really can't think of a situation where I'd want to do that. But lastly is the 16:9 option, which does crop off the top of the image and reduces the overall field of view. It's so big anyways, for me this is the best way to do 4:3 to 16:9 switching, because with any 16:9 camera you lose vertical field of view anyways, and with quadcopters, for me it's the vertical field of view that's most important. Next we have noise reduction, and I've tried all of the other settings and I can't tell a single difference between any of them. Perhaps it's my old eyes. The same goes for the MPEG noise reduction for the DVR, so I left everything as it came out of the box. Here is where it starts to get complicated. So a short press to the right in the same menu gives you sound options, where there are some EQ presets as well as user settings, and these both affect the analog sound as well as the HDMI input sound that comes out of the headphone jack. There's an audio balance option, an auto volume option, as well as surround sound. Now, for you guys who like to fly with audio, some of these settings could be really useful, but the surround sound option is surely overkill unless you're using these as a cinema goggle through HDMI, in which case you most likely have a better media center that outdoes watching a movie through these goggles hooked up to your surround sound system. Anyways, if I go back to the main menu and then short press to the left where it says picture, we have restore factory defaults, which I can get my head around. Then we have this HDMI CEC option, which allows external devices such as a Blu-ray player able to control some of the HDMI options. The extended manual says that when using the goggles in conjunction with a CEC device, the DVR button then controls those functions. But the manual is about as clear as mud when it comes to explaining the benefits of this option for FPV. I suppose as FPV has started its high definition journey, and the fact that these screens are more than worthy of HD FPV, perhaps this CEC setting can be exploited in the future. For example, maybe plugging in a HDMI source into the goggles could potentially automatically send them into HDMI mode rather than having to manually switch into HDMI mode. But as I understand it, the corresponding device also has to support CEC. So for the moment, all of these HDMI options are there as if the menu has been repurposed from cinema goggles, which is where FPV goggles originated from. So perhaps I shouldn't be surprised by that. The same goes for this HDMI ARC feature, which is a method of sending multiple audio sources through one cable. So for now, I can't see how this could be applied to FPV, but perhaps it could have some use in the future. The problem is, by the time that happens, goggles will surely have moved on as well. I'm seeing a positive here, and that is the ability to update the firmware. So it's strange that Eachine have told me that there's no way that they can remove the on-screen display. Perhaps like most goggles, the DVR and the on-screen display and the menu system all have different firmwares, and the on-screen display can't be updated, which is a shame because I know it will be a deal breaker for some people. So if I wait for the menu to time out, long press the mode button to the right, you can select between HDMI, 5.8 GHz and AV in. The HDMI can take up to a 1080p 50 or 60 Hz signal, but of course it will downscale it to the resolution of the Alcos panels. Then lastly, a short press of the mode button sends the goggles into what they are calling race mode, which is their attempt to pick frequencies to allow either 4, 6 or 8 pilots to fly at the same time. You use the channel buttons to select which pilot you are. The only problem with that is all of the pilots have to be using the EV300Ds because they don't tell you which frequencies you are on. So here is a chart to tell you what they all are. But these days races are usually ran to their own standard. So while I appreciate what they're trying to do, they are imagining a situation where up to 8 pilots are flying together using EV300Ds, and in reality it's rare that even 2 people are using the same set of goggles when flying in a group. Anyways, let's take a look at the underneath of the goggles. So we've got the DC jack and a USB port, which is purely for firmware updates. It won't power the goggles up or act as a mass storage device for the DVR. Then there's the stereo headphone jack, and on the other side is the HDMI in and the AV in and out socket. The goggles come in this pouch and you are given a white cloth as well as the manual. So let's take a look at some DVR footage. The EV300Ds, which I'm flying with, are on the left hand side of the screen, and the Fat Shark HDOs with the rapid fire module is on the right, which always destroys any budget goggle or modules. So I'm only running Omnis on the rapid fire to give the EV300Ds a fighting chance distance wise, and the Fat Sharks are also hanging around my neck facing to the ground, which isn't ideal for them either. And just as I suspected, like the EV200Ds, the dual diversity system doesn't seem to be making a difference. In fact, I'd say it performs worse than every other diversity system that I've tried, so it's good news that they can be taken out. Now, I mentioned earlier that there are some downsides to running the H.264 codec with a DVR, and the biggest one is that it drops too many frames when it receives static. So, normally when I'm doing these side-by-side comparisons, the DVRs do get a little bit out of sync with each other because MJPEG also drops a few frames when it sees static. But it's usually less than 1%, so they are really easy to offset to make a like-for-like comparison. But the EV300Ds are dropping so many frames, it's really difficult to match them up. And you will see when the frames drop because it just skips forward like the DJI goggle DVR does when you push its range. I guess if you are just using the DVR to find a lost model or are watching it back for fun, then it's not really an issue. But this is why so many built-in DVRs haven't changed for years, and they are low quality and have a low resolution, and it's because it does the job. And to get any better would require processing power that would make the goggles even more expensive, and they'd have to be bigger as well to cater for that. There's also no mass market demand to make a small high quality DVR for analog video because everything outside of the hobby is digital now, and these DVRs are repurposed from other products. So if I were Eachine, I would have put the same MJPEG DVR that's in all of the other goggles rather than chasing numbers that look better on paper rather than performing well on a computer screen. It's also worth mentioning that the DVR doesn't record any audio. It only sends the audio out through the stereo jack. But anyways, I've got to be realistic here and say that if Eachine stick to their promises and make the changes that they say they're going to, then at the price they are currently listed at, these could well be a Fat Shark competitor. And I think that's a much better way than saying Fat Shark killer ? So I'll leave you with some footage of me flying some freestyle with the EV300Ds and the rapid fire module. I'll put a link in the description of this video as well as a pinned comment if you like what you have seen. And at the making of this video, I think there's a Black Friday coupon for them, so I'll also add a link to the discount spreadsheet in the below. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.
Like devotion, empty notion. Like a roaring ocean, slow in motion. Lay down your troubled mind. We are only kind and will kindly cease to be as we intertwine with the universe and its cosmic symphony. The smoke lingers after fire.